In the year 2031, the skies above Earth went silent for exactly 17 minutes. No satellites pinged, no aircraft responded, no radio signal crossed the atmosphere. Then, in a flash of blinding silver light, 12,000 humans vanished without a trace. They were taken from their homes, their beds, their cars, their offices, and their streets. The Velthari had arrived, ancient, methodical. Utterly convinced of their own supreme superiority, they had spent 4 centuries cataloging species across the Milky Way and beyond its edges. Every species they encountered fell into what the Velthari called a genre, a behavioral trap. Warriors charged forward blindly. Diplomats talked endlessly. Scientists froze before incomprehensible technology. Each genre made a species predictable, and predictable species were easy to control and contain. The Velthari called humans Agenda 7, the Helpless Collective. A species easily broken by isolation. They had run the calculation 40,000 times across 200 civilizations. Agenda 7 never escaped, never adapted. They took 12,000 humans aboard the vessel of classification, a ship the size of a moon. The humans were sorted into containment chambers designed specifically to exploit Genre 7 weaknesses. Each chamber was a perfectly engineered despairing engine, built to make escape feel psychologically impossible. Commander Velfan oversaw the intake. He had processed 47 species before. None had surprised him. He watched the humans stumble into their chambers, confused, frightened, grabbing each other's arms. He logged his initial observation into the Great Record. Species E is 1347, compliant genre confirmed. He gave them 3 days before the formal classification process would begin, a generous timeline. He had never needed more than 2. What Veltan did not know, what none of the Veltari could have known, was this. Humans had been escaping genre traps for 340 years before the Velthari ever found them. Not alien genre traps. Their own, the ones they built for each other across centuries of history. Prisonse's concentration camps, slave ships, gulags, asylums, bunkers, abusive homes, burning buildings. Humans had been locked in impossible places since before they had a word for impossible, and they had gotten very, very good at finding the door. If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves sci-fi. Chamber Block 7 Alpha housed 200 humans, most of them ordinary people with no military training. There was a retired school teacher named Dora, a plumber named Kofi, a teenager named Asha. There was a former prisoner named Marcus who had done 12 years in a maximum security facility. There was an engineer named Priya who had survived a building collapse in Chennai 7 years prior. None of them were warriors. The Velthari had specifically avoided taking military personnel in the first sweep. Genre 7, after all, broke fastest when stripped of their defenders. That was the whole theory. The chamber walls were a smooth black composite that absorbed light, sound, and electromagnetic signals equally. The food dispensers delivered exactly enough caloric nutrition to sustain life, but not enough for vigor. The temperature was set at a precise 16 degrees Celsius, cold enough to dull thinking over time. The lighting cycled in patterns designed to disrupt the human circadian rhythm within 48 to 72 hours. Belthon had commissioned these chambers from the architects of Meldura, the galaxy's foremost captivity specialists. The architects had studied 300 species. The chambers had a 100% behavioral compliance rate. On the first day, the humans in Block 7 Alpha did what Genre 7 species always did. They panicked. They cried. They pounded the walls. They screamed into the silence until their throats bled. Veltha noted this with satisfaction. Stage 1. Chaos. Right on schedule. On the second day, something small happened. Something the sensors almost missed. The school teacher, Dora, sat in the middle of the floor and asked everyone to come sit with her. Not to plan, not to escape, just to sit together and say their names out loud, one by one. 200 people sat in a circle on a cold alien floor and said their names. Dora listened to every single one. She repeated each name back, She made eye contact. She said, "I see you. You are real. You are not alone. We are going to be okay." The Veltheri sensors flagged this behavior as Stage 2, grief bonding, still within predicted genre parameters. On the third day, Marcus walked the entire perimeter of the chamber for 6 straight hours. He ran his fingers along every centimeter of wall. He pressed. He tapped. He listened for hollow echoes. He had done this in his first prison cell at age 19. He had found a loose drainage panel. He found nothing in the alien chamber. But he learned the wall's material, its thickness, its resonance. He came back to the group and said, "The walls aren't solid through. There are seams at the corners. They're sealed with something electromagnetic, not mechanical. Which means, if we change the charge of the surface..." Preya looked up. She had been quietly disassembling her food dispenser for the past 18 hours. She held up a thin strip of something metallic she had extracted from inside the dispenser's heating coil. "Like this," she said. Belthon's sensor team flagged an anomaly. The food dispenser in Block 7 Alpha had been tampered with. He reviewed the footage. He watched Preya's careful, patient, methodical disassembly over 18 hours. He frowned. Genre 7 species did not typically interact with technology that wasn't obviously intuitive. And made a note, he did not yet consider it significant. He would later describe this moment as the greatest professional error of his 4-century career. In Block 12 Bata, a different kind of escape was already underway. A psychological one. The Veltheri had placed 150 humans in a chamber designed to maximize internal conflict and social fracture. Half the occupants had been given slightly more food. Half had been given slightly warmer sleeping areas. The architects called this the Wedge Protocol. Within 72 hours, most species turned on each other viciously. A man named Tariq noticed the disparity on Hour 4. He called a meeting on Hour 5. "They want us to fight over this," he said plainly, "so we're not going to." He proposed immediate equalization. Every scrap of food and every warm corner shared equally, immediately. 2 people objected. Tariq listened to both of them completely without interrupting before he responded. He didn't argue with them. He just asked them to imagine how the aliens were watching and hoping. Both people went quiet. Then one of them started redistributing food without another word being spoken. "If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. This story is just getting started, and it gets so much bigger." The Velthri sensor logs across all 60 containment blocks began showing anomalies by Hour 96. Anomaly 1, sustained cooperative behavior in 47 of 60 blocks, well beyond predicted fracture timeline. Anomaly 2, systematic physical examination of chamber infrastructure in 31 blocks simultaneously. Anomaly 3, unidentified signal patterns between blocks. Humans were somehow communicating across sealed walls. They were doing it with sound, specifically with rhythm, tapping patterns on the shared walls between chambers. Asha, the teenager, had figured it out. She had grown up learning Morse code as a hobby. She had taught it to everyone in Block 7 Alpha in 4 hours using only demonstration and repetition. Within 2 days, a crude but functional communication network spanned 22 adjacent blocks. They were not just sharing morale. They were sharing data. Wall thickness, seal patterns, dispenser components. They were crowdsourcing an escape plan across 4,000 people who had never met before their abduction. Velthan called an emergency review. His senior analysts reviewed all footage and all sensor logs carefully. One analyst, a young Veltheri named Zelmora, raised her hand during the briefing. "Commander," she said, "the communication network they've built, it's more sophisticated than anything in our genre models. Genre 7 does not build distributed intelligence structures," she said carefully. "Not in the first week." Belton studied the tapping patterns on screen. Rhythmic, precise, evolving, adapting in real time. Recalibrate the genre assignment. A side at last. Perhaps we misclassified initially. They may be Genre 4. Genre 4 was the persistent collective, more resilient, but still ultimately containable. Still predictable. He ordered the chamber temperature dropped another 3 degrees, and the food ration reduced by 15%. He had broken genre for species this way before. Faster, even The cold was very effective. In Block 7 Alpha, when the temperature dropped, Dora immediately organized a body heat-sharing rotation. People slept in clusters, rotating outer positions every 45 minutes so no one bore the cold alone for long. When the food ration dropped, Kofi the plumber, who had grown up in a village with seasonal famine, reorganized their entire eating schedule. 2 smaller meals, instead of 1, timed to align with alertness cycles. Maximum efficiency from minimum intake, Marcus said quietly to Priya. They're trying to slow us down. That means we're doing something right. Priya nodded. She had, by this point, partially reverse-engineered the electromagnetic seal on the chamber's northeast corner. She didn't have the tools to break it, not yet. But she knew exactly what tools she would need. She began drafting a list on the floor using a sharpened corner of her food tray. By the end of the first week, 340 years of human escape history was becoming visible in alien data logs. The slaves of the transatlantic trade had taught their descendants how to survive impossible conditions with invisible solidarity. The prisoners of the 20th century's darkest regimes had written survival manuals in their letters and their testimonies. The hostages, the trapped miners, the castaways, the refugees, all had contributed to a vast cultural inheritance, an inheritance that was not stored in books or databases but in the bones and habits of ordinary people. Dora knew how to maintain morale because her grandmother had kept a classroom functioning during an occupation. Tariq knew how to prevent fracture because his grandfather had managed a refugee camp for 3 years. Marcus knew how to read a prison because he had lived inside one and refused to be broken. Priya knew how to take apart machines because her mentor had taught her that understanding precedes escape. Asha knew Morse code because a lonely kid had once reached across the internet to an old man who knew it. None of them were extraordinary. All of them were the product of a species that had been through this before. Make sure you share this video. More people need to hear this story. Drop it in a group chat right now. By the end of week 2, 3 blocks had achieved partial structural breach of their chamber walls. Not enough to escape, but enough to confirm that the walls could be breached with sufficient effort and coordination. The signal traveled through the TAP network within hours. 22 blocks recalibrated their approach based on the data. In the Velthari command center, alarms were sounding that had not sounded in 4 centuries of operation. Veltan was no longer sleeping. His analysts were running projections, reclassifying, and running them again. Genre 3. One analyst suggested Genre 3 was the adaptive collective. Dangerous, but still historically containable. No, said Zelmora. She had been studying the footage for 18 hours straight without pause or rest. Look at the distribution of problem solving, she said. It's not centralized. There's no hierarchy of intelligence here. Every single individual is contributing. The plumber is doing structural analysis. The child is doing communications engineering. The retired teacher is functioning as a psychological stabilization system for 200 people simultaneously and continuously. This is not Genre 3. I don't think this is any genre we have a classification system for. Velthon stared at the screens for a long moment. He had 200 years of experience in this work. He had never said what he was about to say. He had never needed to. Activate the suppression protocol, he said quietly. All blocks. Full sedation. Gas dispersal. Immediately. The suppression protocol was reserved for species that had been misclassified as dangerous. It had never failed. In Block 7 Alpha, Esha smelled it first. Something sweet and slightly metallic in the recycled air. She recognized it from a chemistry class 3 years ago. Something used in industrial sedation of livestock. She shouted a warning before it hit. Cover your faces. Breathe through fabric. Stay awake. People tore strips from their clothing. They pressed damp fabric to their mouths. They helped each other. 37 people lost consciousness. The other 163 stayed awake. In the blocks that had received the communication through the TAP network, the numbers were even better. The suppression protocol incapacitated an average of 60 to 80% of every species it had ever been used on. It incapacitated 22% of the humans in connected blocks. In Block 7 Alpha, it incapacitated 18%. Belthon reviewed the numbers in absolute silence for 11 minutes. His analyst did not speak. Then he called the High Consul of the Velthari Collective on an encrypted channel. The first such call in his career. "High Consul," he said. "I believe we have made a significant error in the classification of species 10,847. They are not genre 7. I am no longer certain they fit any genre in our existing classification framework. I am requesting full suspension of the classification process, an emergency consultation with the Architect Council." The High Consul, an ancient being who had lived for 600 years, was quiet for a long time. "Are they aggressive?" she asked at last. "No," said Velthon. "They're ... cooperative. They are building systems. They are learning from each other at speed. They are not trying to fight us. They are trying to understand us. And I believe they are succeeding. Drop a like if this story is hitting different, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next." Week 3. The humans in Block 7 Alpha had achieved something the architects had declared structurally impossible. They had created a sustained electromagnetic resonance in the corner, seal using nothing but disassembled food dispenser components. It wasn't a break. Not yet. It was more like a key they had built from scratch in 3 weeks. Bria held it up, a crude, hand-fashioned device the size of a television remote, cobbled from alien parts. "It won't open the door," she said honestly, "but it will disable the seal for approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds, Marcus repeated. He looked at the corner. He looked at Kofi. He looked at the wall. "I've been through tighter windows," Marcus said. He rolled his shoulders. He had spent 12 years preparing for moments like this. In the command center, sensor alert 7 Alpha critical, triggered at 3:14 station time. No one was monitoring it. The entire senior staff had been called to the High Consul briefing on the reclassification emergency. The automated system logged the alert. It flagged it as low priority. A maintenance issue with a food dispenser. Marcus went through the corner in 3.8 seconds. He was 47 years old and hadn't run in 5 years. Ran now. The corridor beyond the seal was dim and humming with the ambient machinery of the vast alien vessel. He had 90 seconds before the seal re-engaged. He used them to memorize the layout visible from the opening. Then he came back, pulled the seal shut behind him, sat down on the floor. Everyone in Block 7 Alpha was looking at him. "Okay," he said. "I know what's out there. Now we need to know who else is out there with us." The tap network went into overdrive. Corridors, guard, rotations, access points, power conduit locations. Over the next 96 hours, 14 individuals in 9 different blocks made brief forays beyond their seals and returned. None were caught, not because the Velfori were incompetent, but because 12,000 humans were looking in every direction at once. A species that had evolved in predator-dense environments had very specific skills when it came to not being seen. Hunters and gatherers had passed those skills to farmers. Farmers had passed them to refugees. Refugees to survivors. The Veltari, who had not faced a natural predator in 800 years, had simply forgotten what hunted things could do. Zelmora finally got her emergency briefing with the High Consul's science team on day 22 of the containment. She presented her data. 44 slides, every anomaly, every reclassification failure, every moment the models had broken down. The science team lead, an elder named Voskather, stopped her on slide 17. "Where are they getting their institutional knowledge?" he asked. "The TAP network is new. The knowledge is not new." "What do you mean?" Zelmora asked. "The behavioral responses we're seeing predate this vessel by centuries," Voskather said slowly. "The patterns are ancient. They came onto this ship already knowing what to do, not individually, collectively, as a species memory. That is not a genre 7 behavior. That is not a genre 3 behavior. That is something we have never cataloged." He looked at Zelmora. His expression was one she had never seen on a senior Velthari's face before. It was close, she realized, to something humans might call fear. Hit like and subscribe right now. We are approaching the moment everything changes, and you do not want to miss it. On day 24, Tariq sent a message through the TAP network that changed everything. "I found the bridge," it read. Not the location, the concept. "I found how they think about containment." He had been communicating with a Velthari maintenance worker who passed Block 12 Beta daily on a service route. He hadn't done it through any technological miracle. He had done it through patient, relentless kindness. Every time the maintenance worker passed, Tariq positioned himself at the observation panel and smiled. Not a pleading smile. Not a manipulative smile. A genuine, calm, interested smile. Every single day. On day 19, the maintenance worker paused. On day 21, he adjusted a setting on his panel unusually slowly. On day 23, a small data chip appeared lodged in the seal of the food dispenser. Vessel schematics, partial and crucial. Tariq hadn't seduced or bribed or threatened. He had simply made a Velthuri feel seen by another thinking being. The same thing Dora had done for 200 humans on day 1 in Block 7. The schematics showed the central power relay for all 60 containment blocks was located in a single accessible corridor. It showed that the corridor had one patrol cycle, lasting 40 minutes, with a 7-minute window of no coverage. It showed that the power relay, if disrupted in a specific way, would unlock every containment block simultaneously. The TAP network transmitted the information to all 22 connected blocks within 3 hours. Plans were made. Roles were assigned, not by rank or strength or heroism, by skill and circumstance. The plumber knew about power systems. The engineer knew about electromagnetic discharge. The former prisoner knew corridors. The retired schoolteacher knew that 200 people in a crisis needed someone to hold them together. On day 26, in the 7-minute window of patrol absence, Priya and Marcus reached the central power relay. Priya held the handmade device. Marcus positioned himself to guard the corridor in both directions. She looked at the relay. She had never seen this technology before. She had 90 seconds to understand it. She later said that she thought about her mentor in Chennai, who had always said, "Every machine wants to be understood." She thought about Dora saying, "You are real. You are not alone. We are going to be okay." She thought about Usher's tapping, steady and certain in the dark, building something invisible and unbreakable. She understood the relay. She made the adjustment. In 60 containment blocks across the vessel of classification, every electromagnetic seal failed simultaneously. 12,000 humans stepped into the corridors of an alien vessel for the first time. They did not run. They did not panic. They moved in the organized, quiet, coordinated way of people who had planned. In the command center, every alarm on the board lit at once. Velthun stood absolutely still. He had been a commander for 200 years. He had processed 47 species. He had never had a containment breach. Not one. Not a partial breach. Not a single individual. Not in 200 years. He had 12,000 simultaneous breaches, every single containment unit. At exactly the same moment, he pressed the emergency lockdown. The vessel's internal systems began cycling to resecure the corridors. Then something happened that the Velthari had never planned for. The humans didn't go for the exits. They went for the communications array. They weren't trying to escape the ship. They were trying to send a message home. If this story moved you, please subscribe and share it. Let more people discover what humans are truly capable of. Asha reached the communications array first. She was 16 years old and had been studying the alien interface for 6 days. She had memorized its logic through the partial schematics, through observation, through the TAP network's collective intelligence. She sat down at the console and began working. Her hands were shaking. She didn't let them stop her. Behind her, Marcus and 3 others held the corridor. Priya worked on the array's secondary systems. Dora stood at the back of the room with her hand on the shoulder of a man who was starting to panic. She said nothing. She just kept her hand there, steady and warm, until his breathing slowed. Asha sent the message in under 4 minutes. Coordinates. Vessel's signature. Status. Contained alive. Breach in progress. She sent it on every frequency she could access. Military. Civilian. Scientific. Every band the array could transmit. She sent it to Earth, to every space station in the solar system, and to every deep space monitoring array. She sent it 14 times in 90 seconds before the Velduri managed to cut the arrays. Outbound signal. Back in the command center, Velthan watched all of this on the monitors. He had not moved in 3 minutes. Zelmora stood beside him. She had watched the entire 26 days unfold. She had seen every anomaly, every adaptation, She had written in her private log every night that she thought the models were wrong. Tonight she was certain. "Commander," she said quietly, "they're not trying to take the ship. They're not trying to harm anyone aboard." She pointed to the monitor where Tariq's block had formed a protective circle around 2 injured Velthari, maintenance workers who had been caught in the corridor during the breach. The humans were giving them water, checking them for injuries, keeping them calm with gestures and soft voices. "They are communicating," Zelmora said. "That is all they have ever been doing. Communicating with each other, with us. They built a network in the dark. They decoded our technology with salvaged parts. They found the one maintenance worker willing to connect. And when they broke free, their first act was not violence or flight. It was transmission." She looked at her commander. His 4th century showed on his face in a way she had never seen before. "Genre 7, she said softly, "does not do any of this. Genre 7 breaks. These beings have been breaking genre traps for 340 years. I think they have broken ours." Velthon was quiet for a long time. The alarms continued. The monitor showed 12,000 humans moving through his vessel, moving carefully, moving cooperatively, moving like something ancient and practiced and entirely, terrifyingly purposeful. Open a channel to them. A sight at last, a direct channel, to whoever is in command. Zelmora hesitated. "They don't appear to have a commander in the traditional sense, sir." "I know," said Velthon. "Open the channel to the school teacher. Like and subscribe if you want to know how the Velthari responded to what Dora said to them." Dora sat down in front of the communication terminal that the Velthari opened. She folded her hands in her lap. She had been a school teacher for 32 years. She had faced classrooms full of frightened children on the worst days. She had faced parents in crisis, administrators in denial, systems that didn't care, and circumstances that were uncontrollable. She had learned one thing above all others in 32 years. The most powerful thing in any room is a calm voice. The screen in front of her showed Velthon's face. Alien. Ancient. Exhausted. Something deeply uncertain in his expression. She looked at him the way she had looked at every child who'd ever sat in front of a desk. She saw something struggling to understand. She decided to help it. "Hello," she said. "My name is Dora. I was a teacher. I'm going to speak slowly and clearly. We don't want your ship. We don't want to harm anyone aboard. We want to go home. We understand that you thought we were something you had seen before. You were wrong. That's okay. You're learning something new right now. That is always a good thing, even when it's difficult." Velthon stared at her. He was 200 years old and had processed 47 civilizations. He had been called many things. He had never been talked to the way a teacher talks to a student who is struggling but capable. It was deeply, profoundly disorienting. He found he could not immediately respond. Dora waited. She was very good at waiting. "You will be returned," Velthon said at last. His voice was careful. "You have my word as commander." "I know," said Dora. She smiled. It was the same smile she gave students who had finally gotten the answer. "I never doubted that. I trusted that when you saw who we actually are, you'd make the right choice." "That's not naive," she said. "I've spent 32 years betting on people's capacity to learn. I've rarely been wrong." Velthon was quiet again. Then he said something that would be quoted in Velthari scholarship for the next 300 years. "What genre are you?" he asked. Dora considered this for a moment. She tilted her head slightly, the way she did when a question was interesting. "None," she said simply. "We're the ones who figured out how to leave your boxers. All of them. Every time." The humans were returned to Earth 72 hours later. All 12,000. Unharmed. Carrying data they had memorized from alien systems. The Velthari recalled the vessel of classification from the Sol system without completing the classification process. In the Great Record, for the first time in 4 centuries, a species entry was filed as genre unclassifiable. The notes attached to the entry, written by Zelmora and approved by Velthon, read as follows. Species 10,847 self-designated humans. Carbon-based. Short-lived by galactic standards. individually fragile, collectively extraordinary. Do not confuse short lifespans with short memory. Their survival knowledge is cultural and generational, not individual. They have spent their entire recorded history building genre traps for each other and then escaping from them. They are not a genre 7. They are not any genre. They are the species that broke the genre model. Recommendation: do not attempt containment. Do not attempt classification. Attempt contact. Carefully. On their terms. They are not dangerous in the way dangerous species are dangerous. They are dangerous in the way a good teacher is dangerous. They make you see yourself clearly. That is, perhaps, the most powerful force in any known galaxy. If this story moved you, please subscribe, hit like, and share it. This channel needs your support to keep going. 3 years passed. Then 5, then 10. The Veltheri returned to Earth's solar system, not with a vessel of classification, with something smaller, a single diplomatic ship. Beltan was on board. So was the maintenance worker who had passed the data chip to Tariq. His name was Velsuno. He had been quietly disciplined by the collective for his actions. He had not regretted them. The Veltheri requested a meeting. The humans agreed. The meeting was held in a neutral location above the moon. Dora was on the human delegation. So was Tariq, Marcus, Priya, Asha now, 26. I'm working in xenolinguistics. Kofi was there too. He had become something of an accidental celebrity after the story came out. He always said the same thing in every interview. I just shared the food. Anyone would have done that. The Veltheri had brought gifts. Technological data, medical advances, navigation charts of the outer galaxy. The humans had brought food. Real food. Cooked food. Enough for both delegations, prepared by volunteers from 6 countries. Veltan sat across from Dora at the negotiating table. He had thought about this moment for 10 years. I owe you an apology, he said. What was done to your people was wrong. We were arrogant. We were wrong. Dora looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said, you were. And you know it. That matters. We accept your apology, she said. Now eat something. Asha's mother made the biryani. And it's extraordinary. Beltan looked at the food. He had not eaten a meal prepared by another species in 200 years. He took a serving. He ate. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "This is remarkable." "Yes," said Dora. "We've always been good at feeding people. In good times and in bad times, we feed people." Velthon thoughts about the 22% incapacitation rate, about the food dispensers that had been turned into escape keys, about the tapping in the walls, about the smile Tariq had offered a maintenance worker every day for 19 days. "Why did you trust us?" he asked. "After what we did, why did you sit across from us without hostility?" Dora shrugged slightly. "Because hostility doesn't teach anyone anything," she said. "And we needed you to learn." Zelmora, seated nearby, made a note in her personal record. She had been making notes about humans for 10 years. She had filled 9 volumes. She suspected she would fill 90 more before she was done. Her current working title for the series was The Species That Refused to Stay in the Box. She thought it was inadequate. She hadn't found better words yet. She thought she might ask Dora to suggest a title when the moment was right. Dora would probably say something simple and true that somehow contained everything. She usually did. Share this video if it gave you goosebumps, and subscribe to make sure you never miss a story like this one. 10 years after first contact, the Veltheri Collective began the slow, painful, necessary work of dismantling the Jana system. It was not fast. For centuries of institutional thinking does not dissolve in a decade. There were factions within the collective who argued that the genre system had worked for 47 species, that humans were an anomaly, an outlier, a product of their unusual and violent history. Zelmora gave a speech at the Grand Assembly that became the most replayed piece of Velthori media in history. She said, "Every species we have encountered was shaped by its history. Humans are no different in that regard. The difference is that their history included suffering that required extraordinary adaptation simply to survive. They were enslaved, imprisoned, besieged, bombed, starved, and isolated. And every time they built systems to escape, we looked at a species shaped by that history and called them helpless. We were not reading the species. We were reading our own arrogance. The genre system was not formally abolished for another 40 years. Change, in ancient civilizations, moves at a glacier's pace, but the cracks Zelmora and Velthon had introduced spread slowly and irreversibly through Velthery. Institutional thought. New analysts, trained in the post-human decade, began applying different frameworks to the species they studied. They looked for resilience systems, cultural memory transfer, cooperative intelligence, distribution, non-hierarchical problem-solving. They found these things everywhere. In species, the collective had written off. In civilizations deemed permanently contained. 3 were reclassified. 2 were released from containment programs within a generation. One of them, upon being released, sent a delegation to Earth. They had heard about the species that had broken the box. They had something they wanted to say. The delegation landed in a small coastal town in what had once been called Portugal. They were met by a retired schoolteacher, who was now very old and moved more slowly than she once had. She brought tea. It was a habit she'd had since the ship. Tea meant a conversation was beginning, not ending. The delegation's leader, a being made of something like iridescent sound, communicated through a translation device. "We were in the Boxers for 200 years. The being said, "We heard you broke out of yours in 26 days. Dora considered this. She poured the tea carefully. "We had 340 years of practice," she said. "It wasn't just us. It was everyone who came before us. The ones who survived things that should have killed them. The ones who taught their children how to survive too. When they put us in those Boxers, they thought they were putting in 12,000 people." She set down the teapot. She looked at the delegation. "They put in every human being who had ever figured out how to get back up," she said. "That's a lot of people." The iridescent being was quiet for a long time. Its translation device made small, clicking sounds. "We want to learn. It's sight at last. How you think, how you share, how you stay together in the dark." Dora smiled. It was the same smile she had given 32 years of students. The same one she'd given Velthon. "That," she said, "is exactly the right question. Sit down. We'll start at the beginning." And somewhere far away, in the archive of the Vessel of Classification, an old log entry was still on record. Filed by Commander Vel. Day 3 of species 10,847 containment. Noted with certainty, genre 7 confirmed. Below it, in a different hand, an annotation had been added years later by an archivist named Z. It read, "See also. Chandra. See also. What happens when you underestimate 340 years of learning to survive?" And below that, a final line she had added just recently, after reading Dora's interview in a xenolinguistics journal. "See also what a good teacher can do with a calm voice and a cup of tea." If this story stayed with you, please like it, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. We tell these stories because they matter, because somewhere in all of it is a truth about what humans actually are. Not warriors, not conquerors, not the strongest or fastest or most technologically advanced species in the galaxy. Just the ones who kept getting back up. Just the ones who tapped on walls in the dark so no one felt alone. Just the ones who shared the food and built the network and smiled at the maintenance worker every single day. Just the ones who, when they finally got to the communications array, didn't call for war. They called home. That's the story. That's always been the story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. The galaxy did not change overnight. Nothing important ever does. But the humans had cracked something open in the Velthery collective that could not be sealed shut again. Like a fault line that had been stressed for centuries, the genre system began showing fractures in unexpected places. Zelmora had predicted it would take a generation. It took less than one. The young moved faster than the old. A Velthery analyst, named Torvin, barely 40 years into his career, submitted a formal reclassification request in year 14. He had been studying species 7,203, a small, aquatic civilization the collective had held in genre to containment for 80 years. Genre 2 was the passive collective beings, the Veltheri deemed too docile and unfocused to self-govern meaningfully. Torvens's report ran to 600 pages. Its conclusion fit in one sentence. We did not study them. We studied our assumptions about them, and then confused our assumptions for data. Zelmora read the report in a single sitting. She forwarded it to Velthan with one word attached. Finally, Velthan, now retired from active command and serving on the collective's oversight board, read it twice. He submitted a formal endorsement. It was the first time in Veltheri history a former commander had challenged a prior classification. The assembly debated for 3 months. They approved the review. It was the beginning of something enormous and slow. Back on Earth, the returned humans were building something of their own. Something quieter but equally world-altering. Asha had finished her xenolinguistics degree and was working on a project she called the Resonance Archive. It was an attempt to document every form of nonverbal communication the humans had used aboard the Veltheri vessel. Tapping. The gesture systems that had evolved block by block. The way Dora used silence as a teaching tool. The way Tariq had communicated entirely through sustained, genuine, daily kindness to a being from another world. Usha's argument, in her doctoral thesis, was that humanity had not survived the vessel through technology or aggression. They had survived through a communication density that exceeded anything the Veltheri sensors had been designed to detect. We talked to each other constantly, she wrote. Through words, yes, but also through food and posture and rhythm. Through the ways someone holds a door open, through the decision to share a corner of warmth in the cold. We were communicating the entire time. The Veltheri thought we were silent. They simply didn't have the instruments for it. If you're watching this for the first time, hit subscribe and like this. It's part 2 of a story worth finishing. Priya, meanwhile, had become something unexpected. A diplomat, not a formal one. She had no title, no office, no budget. She had something the formal diplomats kept lacking. She had spent 3 weeks taking apart alien technology with her bare hands in a cold room with no tools. She understood the Veltheri not through briefing papers, but through the logic of their machines, which had become her machines. She understood how they thought about problems systematically, hierarchically, with great confidence in their own models. She also understood exactly where that kind of thinking became a blind spot, because she had navigated that blind spot from the inside. In year 12, when the first formal Veltheri human trade negotiations stalled badly over a technical misunderstanding, Priya was called in. Both delegations had been talking past each other for 9 days. The Veltheri were frustrated. The humans were exhausted. Priya walked into the room, sat down, and asked everyone on both sides to stop talking for 5 minutes. In the silence, she drew a simple diagram on a piece of paper, not a technical schematic. A story diagram. It showed a box, then a person inside the box. Then a door opening, then 2 figures standing outside together. She didn't label it. She slid it to the center of the table and waited. A young Veltheri analyst looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at Priya. The trade agreement is the door, the analyst said slowly. And we are both outside the box, together. Yes, said Priya. The negotiation concluded in 4 hours. Marcus had gone a different direction entirely. He had become a writer. He had never written anything longer than a letter before the abduction. He had not thought of himself as a person who wrote, but something had happened to him in the corridors of the Veltheri vessel, in those 3.8 seconds and everything after. He had understood, in a way he hadn't before, that his whole life had been preparation for those 3.8 seconds. His 12 years in prison. The way he'd learned to read a space before entering it. The patience. The stillness. He wrote a book about it. Not a memoir, exactly. More of a manual for surviving places that aren't supposed to be survivable. It was not initially published by any major house. He self-published it. He sold it for whatever people could pay. It was read in 47 countries within 6 months. It was translated into 31 languages within a year. It was eventually used as a core text in 3 different fields: psychology, emergency response, and xeno. He had spent 3 weeks trying to think of something more profound. He came back to the simplest thing every time. The book was called Getting back up, Kofi had gone back to plumbing. This was, to the significant bewilderment of every media outlet that covered the returnees, not a joke. He had genuinely returned to his work, his clients, his ordinary rhythms, within 2 months of being back on Earth. When an interviewer finally got him to sit down and explain himself, he was characteristically direct. "People still need working pipes," he said. "I still know how to fix them." "What else would I do?" "Don't you feel cold to something bigger?" the interviewer asked. Kofi thought about this. He looked out the window for a moment. "I shared the food," he said. "I helped fix the power relay. I did what was needed when it was needed. That's all any of us did. We saw what was needed and we did it. The job changes. The principle doesn't." The interview went viral. The phrase, "the job changes." The principle doesn't appear on walls in 12 cities. Kofi was reportedly embarrassed by this. He did not stop plumbing. Share this story if Kofi's answer gave you something, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Dora was 74 years old in year 15 when the second Valkyrie contact delegation arrived. This one was different from the first, larger, more formal, carrying something specific. A question. The Valkyrie Collective, after 15 years of internal review and argument and the slow grinding work of institutional change, had a request. They wanted to send observers, not to classify, not to contain, to learn. Specifically, they wanted to understand how humans transmitted survival knowledge across generations without centralized record-keeping. They had reviewed everything available: academic papers, oral history archives, Marcus's book, Usher's resonance thesis. They still didn't fully understand the mechanism. How did a retired teacher and a former prisoner arrive at the same tools? How did a teenager in one city know the same adaptive instincts as an engineer from a different continent? They had a word for what they were looking for. In Velferit, translated roughly as the thread that does not break. They wanted to understand the thread. Dora accepted the request on behalf of no official body. She had no official standing to accept anything on anyone's behalf. She accepted it the way she accepted most things. As a teacher accepts a student with a genuine question. "Send your observers," she said. "Send them to ordinary places. Not universities, not government buildings. Send them to schools, to markets, to the houses of people who have survived very hard things and kept going. Send them to kitchens," she added. "A great deal of what you're looking for happens in kitchens." Velsuno, the maintenance worker who had passed the data chip to Tariq 12 years earlier, was one of the observers. He had requested the assignment specifically. The collective had been uncertain. His record carried the old disciplinary note. Zelmora had personally overridden the hesitation. She had written in his file, "His instinct was correct before ours was." Velsuno arrived in the same coastal Portuguese town where Dora still lived. He arrived in late autumn. The light was particular, golden and fading, the way light gets when the year is winding toward its end. He sat at Dora's kitchen table for the first time and looked at the shelves of objects that lined the walls. Photographs, small pottery pieces, a child's drawing in a frame, a bowl of dried flowers, books with broken spines. "What are these?" he asked through his translation device. "Evidence," said Dora. She set down his tea. "Of what?" "That people were here. That they mattered. That the things they touched and made and gave away are still here after them." Velsuno was quiet for a while. He looked at a photograph. 2 women, laughing, in a place with a great deal of light. "On our vessel, as cited slowly, our personal spaces contain nothing from those who came before us. That is considered orderly, efficient. The past is stored in the Great Record. Not in our living spaces." Dora nodded. "And when you're in trouble," she said, "can you feel the Great Record? Can it hold your hand?" Velsuno did not answer immediately. The translation device clicked softly. "No," he said at last. "That," said Dora gently, "is the thread. If this is landing for you, please hit like and subscribe to hear more stories that ask the real questions." The observers spent 8 months on Earth. They went where Dora had sent them. They went to schools and watched teachers do what teachers do, repeat the same things 30 different ways. until one-way works. They went to markets and watched the small negotiations of daily life, the way strangers extend and retract trust in seconds. They went to community centers in cities where hard things had happened, and watched people organize around shared difficulty. They sat in kitchens and watched grandmothers teach grandchildren things that had no name and no manual, but were essential. Velsuno kept a private journal. He wrote in it every day. It was, by the end of 8 months, very long. He wrote about a boy in a school in Lagos who failed a test and was not shamed, but redirected. He wrote about a woman in Istanbul who ran a small bakery and somehow held her entire neighborhood together through bread. He wrote about a community meeting in a flood-damaged town in Bangladesh where people disagreed fiercely but did not stop talking. He wrote about an elderly man in rural Japan who had survived 3 separate catastrophes and laughed when asked how. "You survived the first one," the man had said. "Then you know it's possible. The second one is easier. The third one you just get through." Velsuno wrote, "They do not prevent suffering. They metabolize it. They turn it into the knowledge of the next person. There is no centralized record, because the record is not stored. It is practiced. It lives in the act of transmission. A grandmother teaching a child to cook is not teaching cooking. She is teaching. This is how we have always come back." He read this entry to Zelmora on a video call. She was silent for a moment on the other end. "That sentence," she said, "is going in volume 10. Velsuno smiled. It was, his colleagues noted afterward, the first time they had seen him smile since the disciplinary note. In the 15th year after first contact, something happened that no one had anticipated. The species the Veltari had held in genre to containment for 80 years. Species 7203. The aquatic civilization made contact, not with the Veltari, with Earth. They had received Asha's original transmission from the vessel, the one she had sent on every frequency, 14 times in 90 seconds. It had taken them 15 years to understand it, not because they were slow, because their frequency receptors were different, but they had worked on it, quietly, in containment, with limited resources and no assistance from their captors. They had worked on it the way humans worked on the corner seal in Block 7 Alpha. Patiently, methodically. Together, their message to Earth was brief. In translation, it read approximately as follows. "We heard you. We have been trying to answer. We are told you know how to break the boxers. Please, advise." Asha was in her office at the Xenolinguistics Institute when the message came through. She read it 3 times. Then she called Dora. Dora was quiet for a moment, tense aside. "Tell them, we'll teach them what we know." All of it, everything Marcus wrote down. Everything Priya figured out. Every tap pattern from the network. "Tell them they are not alone. Tell them we see them. Tell them they are real." Asha typed the response. Her hands were not shaking this time. She had learned from the best. Subscribe and share this right now, because this moment is the whole reason we tell these stories. The exchange with species 7203 became the foundation for something entirely new in galactic history. Not a treaty. Not an alliance. Not a formal framework with signatories and legal structures and enforcement mechanisms. Something older than all of that. Something humans had been doing for 340 years without a formal name for it. A network of the survived. A community of those who had been in boxers and found their way out. It grew. Slowly. Species. Contacted. Species. Stories were exchanged. Techniques were shared. The TAP network that Asha had built in a cold alien corridor became a template for interstellar communication among the contained. The Veltheri watched all of this from the outside. Some with alarm, some with something that took time to name. Belthon, now very old by any standard, watched it from his retirement home in the collective's outer territories. He had a small garden. He had started it after returning from the Sol System negotiations. He had no cultural tradition of gardens. The Valtori did not have a concept of cultivating beautiful things with no utility. He had started it because he had watched Dora tend the dried flowers on her kitchen shelf and understood something. He wasn't sure he could have explained what he understood. He just knew the garden was necessary. Zelmora visited him in year 18. She was working on volume 12. She had some questions only he could answer. They sat in the garden, and she asked them one by one. The last question she asked was the one she had been saving. "Do you regret it?" she said. "The abduction." "What we did?" Velthon looked at his garden for a long time. "Every day," he said. "What we did was wrong. The harm was real. Regret is the least I owe." "But," he said, and paused. "But..." Selmora waited. "But I also think, and I know this may be the most self-serving thought I have ever had, I think it had to happen, not because the suffering was necessary. It wasn't. We could have simply knocked and asked to be introduced, but because we wouldn't have. Not then, not in 200 years of that work. We were too certain of our framework. It took 12,000 people escaping from our best containment technology in 26 days to make us uncertain enough to learn." He was quiet. A small wind moved through the garden. Something small and colorful landed on a flower he didn't have a name for. He had grown the flower from a seed Dora had mailed him 2 years ago. She had enclosed a note. The note said, "I thought you might like something that grows toward light. Most things do if given the chance." Zelmora watched the small creature on the flower. She made a note, not for volume 12. For herself, she wrote, "He is becoming someone the person he was would not have recognized." I think that is what learning actually is. If this story has meant something to you, please like it, subscribe, and share it with someone you love. In year 20, Dora turned 79. Her students, former, many of them now middle-aged, threw her a party. It was held in the school where she had taught for 32 years, the one she had returned to after the vessel. She had insisted on going back. The children needed teachers, she said. She was a teacher. The math was simple. The party was loud and full of children she had taught and grandchildren of children she had taught. Tariq came from across the country. Marcus flew in from his book tour. Priya took a break from her third negotiation. Kofi drove 2 hours and brought a dish his mother used to make, and somehow it was exactly the right thing. Asha came late because a transmission from species 7203 had arrived mid-afternoon, and she had stayed to decode it. She came in breathless and slightly flustered, and Dora handed her a plate without a word. Velsuno attended via screen from the Veltheri Collective's new Earth Liaison office, which had opened in year 17. He had been appointed the first Veltheri Earth Liaison. The disciplinary note had been formally expunged from his record. He watched the party through the screen with an expression Asha had learned to read over 6 years of working with him. He was, she knew, doing the thing Veltheri didn't have a word for. The thing that was something like belonging. She caught his eye through the camera. She raised her glass. He raised whatever he was holding. Neither of them needed a translation device for that. At the end of the evening, someone asked Dora to say something. She declined 3 times. Then she said something. It was short. It was her. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what Velthon asked me on the ship." "What genre are you?" he asked. "I've been thinking about that question for 20 years. I don't think the answer is none. Like I said then, I think the answer is, we're the ones who keep asking the question. Every generation asks it fresh. Who are we? What are we capable of? What do we owe each other in the dark? We never settle the answer. We can they. Because every generation has to earn it for themselves. That's the thread. That's what we pass down. Not the answer. The insistence on asking. The room was quiet in a good way. The way rooms get when something true has been said in them. Then Kofi, who was sitting in the back with a second helping of his mother's dish, said simply, "That's the one." And the room laughed, and the party went on. And outside the school, the autumn light was doing its particular thing again. The kind of light that makes you feel the year and the world and your own small place in it all at once. The last part of this story does not happen in a dramatic moment. It happens slowly, the way most real things do. Over the next decade, the network of the survived grew to include 11 species across 4-star systems. The Veltheri's genre system was formally suspended, pending full review. In year 22, at the end of it, the genre system was not abolished. It was replaced with something the humans had suggested. A question-based framework. Instead of, "What genre is this species?" the framework asked, "But has this species survived? And how?" Zelmora wrote the framework. She credited Dora in the acknowledgements. She also credited Marcus and Kofi. She credited the TAP network. She credited Tariq's daily smile. She credited Priya's 4 seconds with the power relay. She credited Usha's transmission, sent 14 times in 90 seconds into a dark and silent galaxy. Just in case someone was listening. Someone had been. Please hit like and subscribe and share this with someone who needs to be reminded what humans are made of. Velton died in year 24. He was 224 years old, which was considered a full and complete Veltari lifespan. His garden was left to the public. The collective designated it a place of cross-species significance. His personal effects included 9 volumes of Zelmora's ongoing series, heavily annotated in the margins in his own hand. The annotations were often single words. Remarkable. Extraordinary. I did not understand this until now. On the last page of Volume 9, next to Zelmora's description of Dora's kitchen shelf and its evidence of presence, he had written 4 words. The translation from Veltheri is approximate. The closest rendering in English is, "This is what matters." Dora lived to 91. She taught until 85. She stopped not because she wanted to, but because her knees made standing difficult. She moved to a smaller home. She brought the dried flowers. She brought the photographs. She brought the broken-spined books. She kept in contact with Velsuno until the end. They had developed an unlikely and genuine friendship over 17 years. He visited in person twice. Both times he sat at her kitchen table and she made tea and they talked. The second visit was in her last year. She was slower. The light in her eyes was the same. He asked her, on that last visit, whether she had been afraid on Tebessel, those first days in the cold dark. She thought about it honestly. Dora always thought about things honestly before she answered. "Yes," she said, "I was very afraid. Every morning I woke up afraid. But I've been afraid before," she said. Classrooms of struggling children. Years my own family went through hard things. Fear is just information. It tells you that something matters. The question is always, what do you do with it? I've always thought the best answer is to do the next small thing, the thing right in front of you. On the ship, the next small thing was asking people to sit in a circle and say their names. So that's what I did. Velsuno wrote this down carefully in his journal that night. He had been writing about Dora for 17 years. He thought, as he wrote, about how many beings across how many worlds were still in boxers they didn't know how to open. He thought about the TAP network, about transmitted knowledge, about the insistence on asking who we are. He thought about Usha's message, sent 14 times in 90 seconds, reaching a species 80 years into containment. "We heard you. We have been trying to answer." He closed his journal. He sat in the quiet of the small room they had given him in Dora's house. Then he opened the journal again and wrote one more line. "The next small thing," he wrote. "Tomorrow I will find someone who needs to hear that they are not alone, and I will tell them." That is how the thread is passed. Not through great speeches or formal frameworks or the weight of institutional change. It passes the way it always has. One voice in the dark, steady and warm, saying, "I see you. You are real. You are not alone. We are going to be okay." And someone, somewhere, hears it and holds it and passes it on. That is the story. That has always been this story. If it reached you, if any part of it landed, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it forward, because that, too, is how the thread is passed. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.